Thank you very much. And can you all hear me clearly at the back over there? There's no need for a microphone or anything like that. Excellent. Well, it's great to be here, and thank you for the welcome. I've left London very early in the morning, and I've been in Liverpool, and I've come cross country by train here to York and back down to London. On Sunday, I was at the Queen's 90th birthday celebrations. Cobra Beer was being served, and we got drenched. It was a truly British day, but no one complained. And of course, when the Queen came out, the sun came out. And, just being there with the backdrop of Buckingham Palace and the Victoria Memorial in front, I just thought the Queen has just overtaken Queen Victoria as a longest-serving monarch, and took me to Imperial College in London. If you go to Imperial College in the quadrangle, there's a tower over there called the Queen's Tower, and that was erected in 1887 to celebrate the Golden Jubilee of Queen Victoria. If you read the plaque on this tower, go there now, you can read it. It says this tower has been built to commemorate the Golden Jubilee of Her Majesty Queen Victoria, Empress of India. Empress of India. In the 19th century, Disraeli, the great Prime Minister, referred to Britain as the workshop of the world. How things changed. When I came here as a 19-year-old to this country to study, third generation in my family to study here on both sides, in the early 1980s, forget the empire, this country was the sick man of Europe. No respect in the world economy whatsoever. The India that I left, which I was brought up in, was a loser economy with no respect. Inward-looking, insular, protective, the consumer starved of choice. And how things have changed. Today, far from being the sick man of Europe, we are the envy of Europe. Today, India is a global, emerging economic superpower, and is the fastest growing major economy in the world. It has overtaken China, and it's growing at 7.5 to 7.6% per year. So that's the backdrop against which we are talking. And with Cobra, I developed Cobra, and I manufacture it in India in 3 locations. Here in the UK, we manufactured in Liverpool, we manufactured in the Northeast, we manufactured in Bedford, and packaged in Cheshire, and now we brew in Burton-on-Trent at the biggest brewery in Britain. And we manufacture in 2 locations in Belgium as well. In fact, I was sharing a panel in Liverpool at the International Festival of Business, and sitting next to me was a former Prime Minister of Belgium. And I told him the Belgians are the best brewers. To this day, our head brewer globally for Cobra is a Belgian, Koen, and he is brilliant. We've got a new product coming out. So, if I may talk about the Britain, just building on that, entrepreneurship. So when I came to this country in the early 80s, entrepreneurship was looked down upon. Del boy, second-hand car salesman. Today it's cool to be an entrepreneur. When I came here, my family and friends told me, if you decide to carry on after your studies and stay in Britain and work, remember you will never get to the top, because you will not be allowed to get to the top. As a foreigner, there will be a glass ceiling for you. And I'm ashamed to say that that was the case 3 decades ago. Today, that glass ceiling has been absolutely shattered. Today, I believe this is a country of true aspiration, where anyone can get anywhere regardless of race, religion, or background. Today, I would go so far as to say that there will be a nation as Prime Minister of Great Britain in my lifetime. That's the opportunity that exists in this country, where the ethnic minorities are now reaching the very top in every field. Entrepreneurship, far from being looked down upon, Britain is now seen as one of the centres for entrepreneurship in the world. London is one of the most entrepreneurial cities in the world, and we celebrate and encourage entrepreneurship. The idea for Cobra, I had this idea when I was a student at Cambridge reading law. It was not a eureka moment. I did not go running through the streets of Cambridge naked. It was an idea that evolved from being dissatisfied with fizzy lagers, which I just couldn't drink. I found them very harsh and bland and bloating. And I loved real ale, bitter, which I love to this day. I found, though I love bitter in a pub, an ale in a pub, but I could not drink ale with food. I found the ale too heavy and too bitter. And I knew ale drinkers hated lagers, and they particularly hated fizzy lagers. And I knew fizzy lagers. I mean, with curry, I'd go to eat Indian food regularly. I couldn't cook when I came here. So I'd go at least twice a week to Indian restaurants. And of course, the most popular drink with Indian food is a chilled lager. Now, chilled, fine, but bloating, lager, spicy food, uncomfortable. And I just thought, this is ridiculous. The restaurant owner could be selling me more beer and more food. And that's what this idea evolved. Why don't I produce a beer in India that I bring over to the UK that is a combination of the refreshment of a lager and the smoothness of an ale combined, that would appeal to men and women alike, have a globally appealing taste, and go with all food, and in particular with Indian food. So that was my idea. It was really, really simple. Now, why didn't somebody think of that before? Beer's been around for millennia, and yet no one had come up with that differentiation before. And that's the beauty of innovation. In 100 years from now, people will come up with a simple idea, and people will say, why didn't somebody think of that before? And when I was starting my business, you're against all the odds, and nobody thinks you stand a chance. I'm an alumnus through executive education of the Harvard Business School. One of our most famous professors there is Michael Porter, and he has this framework of 5 forces analysis of market entry. So you've got to pass these 5 tests before you choose to enter a market. Well, I would have failed all 5. And yet I started. Your family, of course, are the ones who really care for you. And when I started Cobra and developing it in Bangalore in India, my father had become Commander-in-Chief of the Central Indian Army, 350,000 troops under his command. And every time I had a break, I'd go up and visit my parents in command headquarters. And I knew my father could not support me financially because Indian Army officers got paid very badly in those days. And at our wedding speech, I remember he said I never had to dissuade my sons from joining the army. All I did was show them my paycheck. And so I said, no money from Dad, but maybe I'll get some emotional support, some moral support, some encouragement. Hey, Dad, my own business, my own beer brand, isn't this great? What are you doing? All this education. And you're becoming an import-export walla. Get a proper job. Become a banker. We won't go there, great profession. So, no one thinks you stand a chance. And of course then, when you start your business, you realize so much about yourself. I just want to ask you all a question. Please be honest with yourselves and with me. It's not a test, it's just a simple question. How many of you think you're creative? Yes or no? If you're creative, just put your hands up. If you're not, keep your hands down. Let me have a look. This is about what I get around the world. About half the audience puts their hands up. So when I was at school, I was told by my teachers, Karan, you're doing well academically, you should do well, keep at it. But you're not creative. Why? I couldn't draw. I was used as an art, not creative. Then I was forced to play the piano. I passed grade 1. I think, Karan, you should give up. You're tone deaf, not creative. I went through my whole childhood, all my education, thinking that I was not creative. But when I started my business, I realized that a skill that I had in abundance was the ability to be creative. And it had been suppressed all my childhood. And I thought, what a waste. And how much we could just improve in every country in the world, let alone this country, if we encouraged our youngsters to be creative from an early age and have that confidence to be creative. And those of you who didn't put your hands up, believe you me, if I could be creative, you can be creative. And it's something we should encourage. And when I started Cobra very early on, I realized that there's one word that sets apart successful entrepreneurs from others. And I learned this from, we were looking for inspiration, my business partner Arjun and I, for inspiration, just some help and guidance. And we found an entrepreneur from Hyderabad, where we were both born, the city in India. And actually, he'd been to my boarding school in Ooty in India as well. So we phoned him up, and he was in Leeds. And so that we, two young Hyderabadis, started a business, could you give us some advice? He was coming to see me in Leeds. So our company car was this bright green, battered Citroën de Chevaux. You know those cars that look like people? Called Albert. And I'm not exaggerating, it cost £295, and we had to push start Albert every day. Push start, and then when you're driving, it was quite exciting because if you look down, you could see the road through the holes in the floor of the car. So we drove an Albert at the station, got onto the train, got to Leeds, and then he picked us up, this entrepreneur, in his very smart car, and drove us through the streets of Leeds. And on the way to his house, he said, I own those two houses there. I own half that street. I own the whole of that street. By the time we got to his house, we realized he owned 250 properties in Leeds, and his business model was very simple. He bought these properties and then rented them out to Leeds University as student accommodation. So safe tenant, regular repeat orders, multi-millionaire. Sat down at his kitchen table and he said, you know, I nearly lost everything. He was a name at Lloyd's. Some people who might remember, if you were a name at Lloyd's, very prestigious, but it was unlimited liability. And fortunes built up over centuries in this country were lost overnight. And he was a name at Lloyd's, but he survived. And he said, I've noticed that there's one word that sets apart successful entrepreneurs from others, and that is guts. They have the guts to do it in the first place, but more importantly, they have the guts to stick with it when others would give up. And all through my journey, I remembered that, and he was so right, because I nearly lost my business 3 times. And we stuck with it. So now, Cobra is exported to 40 countries. I always encourage entrepreneurs to think global from day one. And of course, we wanted to produce the finest ever Indian beer. And at Harvard Business School this year, I go back for a refresher every year, we learned about leadership. And to be a good leader, you're meant to be confident, but not arrogant. You're meant to be ambitious, but humble. So you need to be ambitious. And I've just come back from Budapest. We've won 5 more gold medals, so ambitiously Cobra's won 88 gold medals. I'm boasting, but we're proud of it. So I graduated in India when I was very young. I went to university at the age of 16, like Gordon Brown. That's where the similarity with Gordon Brown stops, by the way. And I think that one of the best things that he did was to not join the euro. And we've got this European Union referendum coming up. And last year was the 200th anniversary of the Battle of Waterloo. And our older daughter, Zara, goes to Wellington College, the school that was built by Queen Victoria in memory of the Duke of Wellington. And we went on this battlefield tour of Waterloo. Have any of you gone to Waterloo? Have any of you seen the battlefield? Okay. Well, it's amazing. I mean, it's quite inspirational. And that's when you realize everyone talks about the Duke of Wellington as the hero and the victor of Waterloo. But actually, it was an Allied victory. It was a European victory against one tyrant, Napoleon. And if the Germans, if Marshal Blucher had not arrived, Wellington would have lost. So it wasn't just Britain, it wasn't just the Duke of Wellington, it was an Allied victory. And that one victory brought 100 years of peace to Europe until the First World War. That was how significant it was. And a few years ago, I was very fortunately appointed as an honorary fellow at my old college at Cambridge, Sydney, Sussex. And I was sitting down at a dinner with the Vice Master Rosamund McCrittrick, a great historian. And she's a world expert on the Emperor Charlemagne. And she just finished writing a brand new history of Charlemagne. And you know, Charlemagne ruled in the 8th and early 9th century, and arguably Europe's greatest ruler. He is the only warrior who expanded his realm from a region smaller than France to an area now known as Western Europe, unifying Europe through the cross and the sword. He's the only person who succeeded in history to unify Europe. And then we were talking about, and she was looking for a title for her book, and we were discussing the concept of a European identity. And I said, I don't think there is any such thing as a European identity. I think this country, we are part of Europe, but I really genuinely do not think that we think of ourselves as European. I mean, even when I travel around Europe, whether it's Budapest or whether it's Paris or anywhere in Europe, there is a similarity of European cities. There's a similar, you know you're in Europe. You come here and it's completely different. And we've always been different, but yet we're part of Europe. I don't think we ever see ourselves as European. And then, as a result of this conversation, she came up, I gave her the title for her book, Charlemagne, The Formation of a European Identity. And she credited me in her book for this. And you know, we've had UKIP, the rhetoric of UKIP, and some of you may be UKIP supporters. And UKIP, I believe, has fueled Theresa May, our Home Secretary, to come up with her the immigration rhetoric and the immigration policies. And I think that the immigration policies we have at the moment are very, very damaging to our universities in particular. Top universities like York over here, Birmingham, Oxford, Cambridge. I don't know the statistics here, but I'm sure it's very similar. At Birmingham, where I'm Chancellor, we have 30% of our academics are foreign, international. Students, international students bring in £14 billion to this country directly and indirectly. They are one of our biggest elements of soft power, and yet we have an immigration policy that sends out a message that this country doesn't want international students. In India, Theresa May actually wanted international students to leave the day they graduated. The headlines in India were, take our money and then get out. International students could work for 2 years. I fought for this in Parliament after graduating in this country for 2 years. That was taken away. Now there's a system where it's so difficult to get that work and get a sponsor. The numbers from India have gone down and plummeted by 50% because there's a feeling that they're not welcome. And the worst part about all this is this government has a policy to reduce immigration to the tens of thousands. The coalition government had it. The Conservative government has it. Even Michael Gove has said, I want to bring immigration down to the tens of thousands. And yet, net immigration is 330,000, of which half is European Union, half is non-European Union. So even if the Brexiteers got their way and stopped European Union immigration dead, which they can't, it's impractical, you're still left with 160, 170,000 of non-European Union as we stand. So you're nowhere near your tens of thousands. And if you include international students within your net immigration figure, you're sending out the signal that I want to reduce international student numbers. That's the perception. And I keep saying, take them out of the net immigration figures. The Prime Minister has agreed with me personally, I think they should be taken out, but they daren't do it because of this phobia of migration that exists in this country. UKIP had a very poor showing with 14% of the vote, with one seat. Sadly, now in the referendum, they have that percentage rule relating to percentage of vote. So I think that with this referendum, the Prime Minister had absolutely no choice but to hold it, because it had to be in its manifesto to keep this country together. People ask me, why are we having this referendum? I don't think that's a done deal. We shouldn't be having the referendum. This is a Conservative Party issue that's been imposed on the whole country. And it was to keep this country, his party together, which is the only way he would have gone to the last election and when he won the last election. The timing of the election, did we have to have it now? Or the latest we could have had this election was next summer, before Britain takes over the presidency of the European Union. You can't have a referendum to be in or out of the presidency of the European Union. But then why now? Why a year? Why right now? And I believe it's because there are major elections taking place in Europe that we did not want to disrupt, and we were persuaded to hold it now. And then the Prime Minister made a very bad miscalculation that he would win these reforms, and on the basis of those reforms, we could have a referendum and stay. Well, those reforms were not insubstantial. You think about it. He got a reform for majority voting in Europe on certain issues. A lot of issues in Europe you need unanimous agreement. Here, to get majority voting was actually a good reform to get. The next reform he got, no further unification where Britain is concerned. I don't think there'll ever be a United States of Europe. It's a utopian idea that will never exist in practicality. India, where I come from, that is a superstate, that is a federal system. The United States is a federal system where you have central defense, central foreign policy, central security, central taxes, as well as states that have autonomy, their own chief ministers that are like prime ministers of their state. They can set some of their own taxes, they compete with each other. That's a true federal system. That will never happen in Europe. So to get this, that we are no longer for any further unification, that was a good reform the Prime Minister got. And the third one was that we will never be involved in any bailout of any of the Eurozone countries. Three pretty good reforms. Did they cut any ice with the electric? Not at all. Nobody talks of the reforms. The Brexiteers have turned around that he didn't get any reforms, so therefore Europe cannot be reformed. Such is the strength of feeling, and I feel that that has backfired badly. In fact, the election campaign itself was so negative. And yet, this country is so fantastic. Last year, at the Expo in Milan, we had the expos that take place around the world. I went to promote Britain and the Great Campaign. And I went around, how many of you have been to an expo before in the world? I mean, these great international, they are huge events. And each country tries to outdo the other. The Americans have to have the biggest stand. That goes without saying. And I saw the British stand, and do you know something? It was the most, you had to almost find it. Then you found it, and you're walking into a garden, walk into this garden, and then you've got this huge structure, the steel structure that is a beehive, giant beehive that you can walk into, flashing lights, and then you ran a buzzing sound, then you realize that this beehive was connected to Nottingham University here in the UK, to a real beehive. And the noise was the noise of the bees, and even the queen bee, and the technology that could simulate. Now that's creativity. That was by far the most clever, outstanding stand of the whole of the expo. And that is the beauty of this country, that we have this ability to do amazing things with just 1% of the population. We are 1% of the world's population, but 4% of the world's economy. One university in the world has won more Nobel Prizes than any other university in the world. Cambridge University, over 90 Nobel Prizes. One college, Trinity College, Cambridge, has won over 30 Nobel Prizes. And they keep winning prizes even now. For a scientist, the ultimate is to be a Fellow of the Royal Society. I was talking about the glass ceiling. Well, who is the President of the Royal Society today? Previous President, Sir Paul Nurse from Birmingham University, Nobel Laureate. His predecessor, my friend Lord Rees, former Master, Astronomer Royal, Master of Trinity College, Cambridge. And now, the current President of the Royal Society, Professor Sir Venki Ramakrishnan, Trinity College Fellow, Nobel Laureate from India. Now, the excellence in this country is absolutely phenomenal. We have design capabilities of the best. Who's the chief designer at Apple? Jonathan Ives, a Brit. Architects, best in the world. The Reichstag in Germany was designed by Norman Foster. Cars, Jaguar Land Rover. I've been around the Land Rover factory, Jaguar factory, outstanding. I mean, when Tata's took over Jaguar Land Rover in 2008, I visited the factory. Nobody wanted to buy that company. They bought the company, financial crisis hit. Their sales fell off a cliff. They went to Peter Mandelson, asked for help. He said no. Peter Mandelson denies it, by the way. I've spoken to Ratan Tata. He said no. And Tata's big. They managed to fund themselves. They poured billions into that company. 8 years later, they make more profit than they paid for the company every year. And their design and creativity and manufacturing excellence is world class. Best of the best. Right here in Britain. Our accountants, best in the world. Our lawyers, best in the world. Advertising agencies, best in the world. Our creative industries, how many Oscar winners, whether it's actors, directors, producers, theatre, our museums, our music industry, classical, rock, whatever. We are phenomenal, this little country, our beer. And yes, and manufacturing, I was speaking today about manufacturing in Liverpool for the EEF. You know, people say British manufacturing is dead. It is still 10% of our economy, and we're the 11th largest manufacturer in the world today. And people say British manufacturing is dead. Far from dead. So, if I may, I'll just read out a poem to you now, which I wrote, and it's called An Ode to the Entrepreneur. Oh, to be an entrepreneur, oh, to do or die. To adapt or die, to defy. Where others say not, where they say no, you say go for it. A journey where good judgment comes from experience, and experience comes from bad judgment. A journey of serendipity, where you see what everyone else sees, but think what no one else has thought. Where you have the guts to never give up, never ever give up. Where you aspire and achieve against all odds with integrity. You make your luck, where determination meets opportunity. You fight the might by not just doing things right, but by doing the right thing, with a large heart, trying to be the best in the world, but also the best for the world, where success is not a destination, but a journey. And as they say in the best exotic marigold hotel, the entrepreneur's journey will always be all right in the end. And if it's not all right, it's not the end. So, my wife is South African. In fact, she's in South Africa as we speak. Our niece is graduating from Cape Town University tomorrow. And I spoke in the tribute debate to Nelson Mandela in the House of Lords. And in there, I spoke about the fact that Mandela used to read this poem every single day by Willem Stanley Invictus, which ends with, I am the master of my fate, I am the captain of my soul. And that is, I think, sums up what being an entrepreneur is. It is in our hands. It's up to you to succeed or not. And I think there's an attitude. And innovation is a state of mind. Entrepreneurship is all about the attitude. And I learned a lot from my father. I was very lucky to study leadership at first hand from him. And when I first started, I qualified as a chartered accountant with what is today Ernst & Young, with EY. And I went on a holiday to India. My father had just become a general. And I was about to start my training. And I said, Dad, I need some advice about work. Could you give me some advice about work? Oh, we want advice about work, do you? Come and see me in my office. I had to get an appointment from his ADC to see him in his office. And I remember sitting in this big office, and I felt very small. And my father gave me lots of advice, which I remember to this day. And the best advice of all this advice was this. He said, son, you're starting at the bottom. You'll be given lots of jobs and lots of tasks. The first thing when you're given a task is to do it. The next thing is do that little bit extra that you were not asked to do. And that's the best advice I've ever been given. Because my father was saying, always take the initiative. Always be creative. Always be innovative. And always go the extra mile. And here we are now with this EU referendum. I'm so worried about it. Can we survive if we leave the EU? Of course we can. We are one of the most open economies in the world. We're an adaptable economy. We're a flexible economy. We will survive. But do we really need to go through this? Do we really need to risk everything that we have? I'm an open Eurosceptic. The European Union needs urgent reform. MEPs have no accountability. I don't know how many of you know who your MEPs are. I haven't a clue. My fellow parliamentarians haven't a clue. Everyone knows who the MPs are. The MPs know who their constituents are. The fact that you have to move your parliament every month for a week from Brussels to Strasbourg. The whole parliament, by the way. Can you imagine if we had to move to Edinburgh or Belfast every month for a week? What a waste of time and money. We're not in the Euro, as I said before. We're not in Schengen. So Lord Owen, Sydney, Sussex alumnus as well, he was right about the euro. He said, good thing we didn't join the euro, one size doesn't fit all. The European Union has 7% of the world's population, 25% of the world's economy, and 50% of the world's welfare spending. Is that sustainable? I don't think it is. And in spite of my reservations, in spite of being a Eurosceptic, I think that we should stay. And I think we should remain within the European Union. I think that the consequences, short-term and medium-term, if we were to leave, this is not scaremongering, it will destabilize us. We have a fragile recovery. We have a huge current account deficit. We have a budget deficit. We have huge debt. We've managed to grow our economy, but it's a fragile recovery. If we leave, we might destabilize our economy in a big way. There might be higher interest rates, inflation, recession, and why? Why risk that? Why? And you know, the Brexiteers talk about, we're the fifth largest economy in the world, we'll be fine on our own. Really? Well, how about the fact that we might be the fifth largest economy in the world because we're in the European Union? And if we leave, are we still going to be the fifth largest economy in the world? The trade agreements, you keep hearing about trade agreements. The WTO, sadly, with the best of intentions, has failed. The WTO has not worked. Otherwise, why do we need all these free trade agreements? We jeopardize all our free trade agreements, which already exist, and that's a whole debate in itself about trade agreements, let alone the trade agreement with the European Union. And then you hear this thing, well, our share of trade with the European Union has been declining. Of course it's been declining because we're doing business with other countries that are emerging, like India and China. But even though it's been declining, what is our percentage of exports to the European Union? 44% of our exports. What is the percentage of our imports from the European Union? 55% of our imports. 50% of our trade is still with the European Union. How can you say that's insignificant? And from the European Union's point of view, we're only 8% of the European Union's exports. So it's hugely significant that we trade with them, and we should be a part. And then we're told by the Brexiteers, who cares what the IMF think? Who cares what the CBI think? Who cares what economists think? Why should they tell us what? They were wrong before. The Americans, except for Trump, believe we should stay. Every European I've spoken to believes we should stay. In India, citizens, civil service, business, politicians, government, stay. Indians see Britain as a gateway to Europe. We are the second largest recipient of inward investment in the world. It's a point that most people don't realize. The City of London is the #1 financial centre of the world. A lot of that investment is financial services. 60% of non-EU companies that have their headquarters in the European Union have their headquarters in this country. Is this inward investment? Are those companies going to carry on having their headquarters if we leave? And they will say, well, we told you not to, and you still did it. We don't care what anyone says. Well, I'm sorry, they care. If that inward investment goes, our economy suffers. It's as simple as that. And then we hear, oh, Europe's a mess. The euro's a mess. It is a mess. One size can never fit all. The fact that Greece and Germany had the same credit rating just because, the same yield on a bond just because they're part of the euro, how foolish could the world have been? They will never be in sync. The only reason the euro has been kept together is it's too difficult to dismantle it. Since 2008, youth unemployment in countries like Spain, Italy, Greece, 50%, 40%. We must leave because look at the mess that Europe's in. Hang on. 2008 to now, 8 years, Europe's been in a mess. What have we done? We've grown. We're not in a mess. Oh, migration. European migration, out of control. Well, I've been saying for years what we need to control is illegal immigration. Tony Blair took away exit checks. When you leave the country, you notice your passport's not checked. Since 1998. Very, very irresponsible thing to have done. We need to bring back exit checks. I've been saying this for years. I believe every passport should be scanned in and out, European and not European. Then we know who's coming to this country, who's there. It's very easy for us. We're an island. It's very easy to do. I've got a queue of Indian IT companies who come and do it within a year. How ridiculous not to have those basic controls. But then what about the 3 million European Union workers who are here in this country? Out of control. Migration Watch, my fellow crossbencher Lord Green. Scaremongering of the highest order. Population will reach 80 million. What is the reality? There are 3 million people in the European Union here. You speak to anyone. I stay around the country. Everywhere I go, every restaurant I go to, every bar I go to, every hotel I stay in, where do they come from? From Eastern Europe. They don't know the language. They're complete strangers. Their culture is different. 1,000 miles away. And they come here, they leave their families, and they're willing to work. And they contribute 5 times as much as they take out in benefits. They're young, they don't use the NHS much. In fact, the NHS, 40% to ethnic minorities, it would collapse. And you hear about the drain on our public services. We've got this all wrong. And by the way, we've got the lowest unemployment in history. We've got the highest employment in history. We've got virtually full employment now. But we've got 3 million people from the European Union here. So what if we didn't have those 3 million people? Where would we be? Would our economy be as successful as it is today? That's the scaremongering versus the reality. So, we're not a superpower. There is only one superpower in the world, and that is America. But we are a global power. We sit at the top table of the world. Permanent seat, United Nations Security Council, G7, G8, G20, NATO, EU. If we leave the EU, we jeopardize our standing as a global power with global influence. And as a senior vice chancellor of a European university, and I will conclude, said to me, how can the UK even think of leaving Europe? You have saved us twice in the last century. How can you even think of being more responsible for what might potentially destroy the European Union? Would you be able to live with that? That's not what this country does. We don't desert. We don't run away. Europeans see us as a beacon of freedom, justice, of democracy and fairness. And then the Brexiteers said, no democracy. We're having a referendum. Loss of sovereignty. Loss of sovereignty? We're in the EU, but we're not in Schengen. We're in the EU, but we're not in the euro. We're in the EU, but we'll never be part of the United States of Europe, which will not exist in the first place. We're in the EU, but our army will never be part of a European Union army. Turkey, well, Turkey is nowhere near joining the European Union. Nowhere near. And 1 million Turks, even if that's true, those are the 1 million who we want to do business with, who are the people who can benefit our economy. They're not going to come and stay over here. Out of 70 million plus people in Turkey, scaremongering of the highest order. And we're not part of Schengen in the first place. We're in the EU, but we still drink our beer in pints. We're in the EU, but we still measure our roads in miles. Nobody can tell us what to do if we don't want to do it. Where is this loss of sovereignty? Where is this lack of democracy? And in terms of justice and fairness, the world over, people come to this country for fairness and justice. Our courts, our rule of law is most respected in the world. Stelios, who founded EasyJet, I know him, Greek, went to the LSE, studied in this country. He told me, he said, I could have set up EasyJet anywhere in Europe. I want to build a European airline. Why did I choose the UK? One of the main reasons I chose the UK is because I knew if I set up my company in the UK as a little airline, I could take our national carrier to court and stand a chance of winning because of the fairness and the justice in this country. You wouldn't find that in any other country in the world, he said, certainly not anywhere else in Europe. That is the reputation that we have. So we are, and the PM's wife, I didn't think I'd ever quote the PM's wife, but anyway, the PM's wife in an article recently said that the PM says we're the best of both worlds. We do, and we have the best of both worlds. And she said we're a big fish in a big pond. 500 million people, 65 million people. If we leave, I believe, we'll be a tiddler in an ocean. That will be the change in perceptive and standing. So, I'm not talking about scaremongering, I'm talking about reality. And the Vice-Chancellor of Cambridge at the beginning of the last academic year He said, why is it this university does so well? Why is it that it produced all these Nobel Prizes? He said, it's because we work together in partnership. And he quoted this old African saying, this old proverb, that if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And I think we've got to go together. And I will conclude now by reading out my favorite poem, which is very pertinent to what we've been talking about. And it's written by Rabindranath Tagore, the Nobel laureate from India. Very short poem. Where the mind is without fear and the head is held high, where knowledge is free, where the world has not been broken up into fragments by narrow domestic walls, where words come out from the depth of truth, where tireless striving stretches its arms towards perfection, where the clear stream of reason has not lost its way into the dreary desert sand of dead habit, where the mind is led forward by thee into ever-widening thought and action, into that heaven of freedom, my Father, let my country